Hello, everyone. I haven't seen the any letter that went out. There's nothing in particular that I'm committed to speaking to, is there? No. Okay, good. Well then, today is today is Easter, and while I often talk about Christianity on Christmas, this is really the center of the Christian year. So this is actually my preferred opportunity to talk about Christianity. And today, the past few years on Easter, I've talked about Christ and the story of dying and being resurrected. But this year, I'd actually prefer to talk about Christianity itself, because it's a tradition that I'm very grateful for. It's this Quaker meeting house that we're in is the place where I grew up spiritually, the place where I learned that there is a way to practice spirituality. Naturally, we all have spiritual paths. We all have spiritual yearnings, whatever that is for us, however we refer to that. But it was here that I learned that it's possible to support each other in that. It's possible to help each other. It's possible for there to be a tradition, just to say a set of teachings and practices that are passed down from person to person, generation to generation, which help us as individuals to walk a spiritual path. That's quite extraordinary, given that this is such an intimately personal sort of a path. So I was brought into a new part of my life in this room. I started coming here when I was 8, and that period from 8 through my teens, about 10 years, 8 to 18 or so, I gained a great deal from the Christian tradition. But as I've continued on and practiced in many other traditions, I have gained a particular gratitude for the history, the long, long history of the Christian tradition. So let me tell you a little bit about that history from my perspective. And naturally, there are a lot of different ways of reading history, a lot of different ways of doing that. And you're going to get one way right now that I read it. And I hope it's useful in our modern period. Christianity was explained to me by a Jewish scholar in Israel as a form of Judaism. It's a kind of Jewish practice. And what happened was that there were a number of different kinds of Judaism, and at roughly the same time, all but one of them died out, and a new one sprang forth. That new one is Christianity, and the Judaism that we know now is the Judaism that survived. Very scholarly form. you actually see Jesus criticize in the Gospels some of the other forms. So at that time, the empire in Rome, the Roman Republic, was growing and taking over a large part of the world and adding significant cultural forces to a lot of Europe. And from the very beginning, Christianity and the Roman cults, the Greco-Roman philosophies, were in a kind of competition. And it looked at first, obviously, those of you who know the history, it was very clear that Christianity wasn't going to make it. That Christianity was a rather poorly formed cult of slaves and the poor, and a few weirdos practice that, and soon enough they'll just be wiped out. We won't have to worry about it anymore because it's absurd. But that wasn't true, and that it seemed poised to the religious, the spiritual force, tradition that seemed like it was going to be most influential in the coming centuries, that being Stoicism. The Stoics, they were the leaders. They were the most advanced form of Greco-Roman philosophy. Different excellent qualities of other schools as time passed, and had formed a very brilliant method in order to conceptualize and in order to be of maximum benefit. The Stoics, I think nowadays we talk about people who are stoic, and we mean someone who doesn't have a lot of emotion. This is what we do when we don't really practice something. We simplify it down into something that that's more dangerous sometimes than not knowing anything about it at all. You hear people do this with Christianity, right? You hear people just insult Christianity and say, "Oh, they just have blind faith. They're just politics of our." And that is a similar thing that happened with the Stoics. There was a sense of, well, they're just not emotional. But really, it was a very advanced way of working with emotion. And it was a way of succumbing to nature. It was a way of giving up one's own selfish desires and coming into alignment with nature. With the will of the whole universe. That was the purpose of the practice. And so that people would sublimate their own emotions, that people would give themselves, surrender to a larger force than themselves. This was seen as, oh, they don't have emotions. They're just heartless. They don't care about things. But that actually isn't what it was about. It was a very specific approach, which I don't have time to get into now, for how to approach life. And as I say, it seemed like it was everything. It was in particular the philosophy, the spiritual practice of the eminent nobles, even emperors, were practicing Stoicism. But it didn't. In fact, most of you have probably never practiced Stoicism. Some of you may not know anything about it. You may have learned more in the past 5 minutes than you've learned about it in your entire life before. that's how little regard we have for it nowadays. And what is it then? What's the practice? What's the spiritual path that took over? Well, obviously Christianity. Why? Well, a lot of reasons, of course, and this is just one tunnel through the complexities of history. But one way to look at it is that Christianity told a better story. Christianity told a much more compelling story than Stoicism told. Stoicism said, well, there's nature, and if you surrender, it'll be good. That was really as compelling of a story as they had, which of course was their goal. They didn't want to have a compelling story because the story is one of the things that human beings put onto nature. But nature is free of our little human views. And so they didn't want to use a magnificent story. But Christianity was very good at making a magnificent story. And in fact, I'd say it made the most impressive story that has ever been told, the most successful story that's ever been told. So what were the elements of that story? Of course, you know the story. And today's the climax of the whole story, when the Christ, the anointed one, the king, emerged after having been killed, after 3 days in the grave. So that part of the story is very important. There's a person who died and then was resurrected. Now, obviously, that story they didn't come up with this story 2,000 years ago. This was a very important kind of a story in the Roman cults. Again, and not only in the Roman cults, you see it all over the world. A very important person dies and comes back, has beaten death. And if they have conquered death, then they've conquered everything. So this is a very good part of a story to bring in. Just so you know, I think it's, I'm not actually disagreeing with it. I'm not saying that didn't really happen, just for your information. I think it's actually quite likely that Jesus was at a point when he could, as far as anyone could tell, die. I think his meditation practice was deep enough to achieve that. Again, that isn't unheard of. There are people in the world who can do that. So I think probably that's what he did. I think it's unlikely that he died as quickly as, other people on the crosses around him were still alive. He most likely entered a state of suspended animation, you might say, and then was buried. But the thing that you see in the story, which is most important, is that he truly surrendered. And the way the story is told is beautiful. He asked his father, why did you abandon me? Why have you abandoned me? He totally surrendered hope. And said, it's finished. That's it. I am finished. I'm done. It's like Peace Pilgrim. She said that the secret to her peace was that she died. Was it the me, the person that she was, died. It's why I never use the name she was born with, because that person died. That's not the person who I'm interested in talking about. That person died, and Peace Pilgrim was born. When that person totally dies, then the spiritual life begins. So this is very, very powerful. It's powerful as a story. It's powerful as a spiritual teaching. What else was brought in? Well, a number of Jewish elements were brought in. As I say, it's in large part a form of Judaism. And In particular, the sense was brought in, very clear sense, that to my knowledge is most developed and developed in a very special way in the Jewish tradition. The teaching is given that this mythology is history. So this is a story that we're going to tell, but it's not, it's history. And this is kind of a fight that people get into nowadays. It's still a fight. It's been a fight for thousands of years now. We didn't invent it. If you get into a fight with someone who says, no, you don't understand, Jesus really did these things, you say, no, you don't understand, that's a history, that's a myth. Say, no, it's real. I say, no, it's not. That conversation, yes, no, has been happening for 2,000 years now. You didn't invent it. More. So that was a very important element to bring in the sense that this is real, this is factual. It's not simply a spiritual tale. This is factual. And then to bring them together, to bring the two traditions together, there was something that actually was very strong in both traditions, in that to have a meal together was very important in the Roman cults and in the Jewish traditions as well. And so there we have the Last Supper, we have the sacrament. This is all about eating a meal together, and is a way that those are brought together. So you take the best of Judaism, and I just mentioned a few little things, there's a lot more, of course. You take the best of the Greco-Roman cult, philosophical, spiritual path. Again, I just mentioned a few. Bring them together, and you get an utterly magnificent story about a hero, an individual who was, as we see happen again and again in the Greek myths, the offspring of a human woman and a male god. That offspring is a hero, and that's actually the technical term for them. He was a hero. That hero then goes through trials and tribulations and dies, conquers death. And this is the supreme story, which, because it was so well told, kicked Stoicism off of its pedestal and took over the world over the next, say 1,500 years or so. And what happened during that 1,500 years? Well, one thing's for sure, until the Enlightenment came around, the European Renaissance came around, the Greek traditions were not clearly understood, certainly not in Europe. To a certain extent, they were revitalized in the Islamic world. But again, not for almost 1,000 years after this transformation took place, when Christianity took over. So let's say we have 1,000 years where the Greek traditions were just lost, not totally lost, of course, but not prominent. What happened then? What happened now that the Christian story took over the Western world? Well, let me put it this way. The reason that I'm so grateful for the Christian tradition is that I imagine what this world will be like in 1,000 years. I imagine more or less all animal species, larger than, I don't know, maybe this machine or maybe this machine, being wiped out, being gone. I imagine the possibility that we'll have a nuclear war. I imagine the possibility that something even worse will happen and life will be even more damaged than it is now. I have a hard time believing that we're not going to continue to go down the path of the destruction of life on Earth. And nothing has contributed more to that path than the Greco-Roman philosophical traditions. Nothing has empowered humanity to destroy life more than what we get from the Greek traditions. We get what we now call science, materialism, the sense that we're all just organic algorithms. Emotions have no meaning, they're just chemicals coursing through brain tissue, electrical signals. It can all be explained that way. And what really matters is the true God of our culture, which is money, and capitalism is a very effective way of promoting that, promoting the growth of that particular God, money. I have a hard time foreseeing that not continuing. And when I look back again, I see for 1,000 years, there was an heroic tradition, an incredible tradition that slowed the march of this evil, and that is Christianity. Christianity was very, very good at stopping capitalism, for example. It was extremely successful. It's put very simply, it discouraged very strongly the lending of money at any level of interest. Now, if you can't lend money and make interest off of it, well, there's no capitalism. Capitalism dies right there. There's no significant economic growth. It's why we nowadays call it the Dark Ages. You say, well, they weren't doing anything. These guilds just did nothing for 1,000 years. Well, it's terrible. Now we have all this progress. But most of the progress that I see is progress in a very sad direction. It also, most importantly of all, Christianity was extremely successful at blocking the Greco-Roman belief that, as they put it, man is the measure of all things. A tradition that we now have, that a religion that probably most people in this room are members of, and that's the religious tradition called humanism. So secular humanism is the sense, so there isn't a God, there isn't anything supernatural. Human beings are the center of the universe. What we experience gives meaning to the universe. We are at the center, and we have the right to do what we want because our happiness is fundamental to goodness. That's what good is. As it is put, man, human beings, are the measure of all things. That's what we subscribe to nowadays more than any other religious tradition. And it is a religious tradition. There's a deep assumption there. And Christianity was extremely successful at blocking that perspective. And that perspective, as I say, is extremely dangerous. It's the most dangerous perspective I know of because it's the final justification for destroying life. I mean, you even hear people say, well, here's a species. What value does it have? What economic value does this species have? If it doesn't have economic value, which is to say value that human beings would pay for, then it doesn't have value. And Christianity took a very different approach and said, no, human beings are not the center of the universe. Human beings are, you could say, more the center of the universe than the than the hunter-gatherer tradition certainly believed. Hunter-gatherer traditions didn't put human beings much at the center of anything. But the only reason that we're close to the center of things, the only reason we matter is that we matter to God. We matter to something that we can't understand. We matter to something that's beyond our comprehension. We matter to something that's giving us some pretty clear rules about how we need to behave. And as long as we behave that way, things will be okay. And people followed that. And people lived according to something greater than themselves, something beyond themselves, something that had a value beyond the value of the human being. There's something that had greater value than human life. And that to me is very interesting. Prime value, as primacy in the world. Human life is what matters. Human happiness, human freedom, human equality, human rights. These various ways of putting human beings at the center of things, to me, has been one of the, well, most devastating worldviews in human history, in world history. And so I appreciate Christianity because Christianity has given us a way to believe in something greater than ourselves. And it's worked. It's been very effective, and it continues to be very effective. I think nowadays scientists feel so proud of ourselves because we know that global warming is happening and those Christians are too stupid to get it. Without understanding, well, yeah, would you rather be good or right? The Christian tradition prevented global warming for 1,000 years. Of course, this is just one way of looking at history, and whenever you talk about counterfactual historical accounts, it becomes confusing. But I do think that that story has been a great gift to life on Earth, and has given us a way to set ourselves aside, has given us a way to look into the universe and see in a way that Stoicism couldn't compel us to see, that there is something more central, more wonderful than ourselves. That there's something more important than human life. There's something more important than my life. There's something more important than the life of my family, something more important than the life of my species. There's something else, and if we're in accordance with that, then our lives have value because of the way we're living them, not simply because we enjoy living them, but because of the sacrifice of ourselves, because of a willingness to not put ourselves at the center. Because of that, we still have a little bit of life left on this planet. We are in the midst of a terrible extinction now, caused by our greed, by human greed. And I hope that on this day of Easter, we can remember that the most important thing for us to do is not put ourselves at the center and protect ourselves. The most important thing for us to do is die. And have faith that if we're needed, we'll be resurrected. And if we're not, well, that's just fine. We're not the center of things after all. So this is a time to pay attention to anything other than what you want and believe. So that's the whole practice for this evening. If you notice yourself paying attention to what you want or believe, turn your attention elsewhere. And in that way, bury yourself, crucify yourself. Let yourself be torn apart and suffocated and crushed. It's fine. If it's needed, it will be resurrected. If not, well, then it's not a loss. If you'd like, you can turn your attention away from what you want and believe by listening. You can listen to the sound of the water, the rainwater dripping from the roof. You can listen to any other sound. Listen to that. Not because you want to, not because you don't want to, not because you believe it will help, because you believe it won't help. Just do it because I told you to. No other reason. Just because someone other than you told you to do it. And that way, surrender. take this opportunity to set aside everything you believe. Everything about your identity, about your life, about your past or your future. Any awareness of whatever story you might tell about yourself, turn your attention elsewhere. And set aside everything that you might want. Maybe you want this practice to work. Maybe you want to be successful or happy. Now's the time to set that aside and pay attention to something else. One way to do this in the Christian tradition, of course, is to visualize yourself taking up your cross and carrying it down the streets and being crucified. Willingly, knowing that this is what must be done. And that way you can set aside whatever you may believe about yourself and whatever you may want. Or if you'd like, you can pray. Pray to something other than yourself, for something other than yourself. Pray to something that's not human, for something that's not human. Pray to God, for the earth. And attend to the life in your body, the life that's coursing through all things, the energy, the flow of nature, the Holy Spirit. Feel the Holy Spirit giving you life, letting you see and hear and feel and breathe. And for 5 minutes or so, move in whatever way you'd like, in order to ground yourself in this life energy. Feel the energy moving through your body that isn't your energy. That allows you to move. Allows you to live. And very slowly give yourself a minute or two to find your way back to a seated position. And if you sit down before a minute or two, then keep moving a little bit, even as you sit. Give yourself plenty of time to find the right position for your body. And continue to pay attention to the movement in your body. In particular, the movement of your breathing. Of course, as your breath moves, your whole body moves. But it may be subtle. But let it be subtle. This movement, the natural flow of your breathing. Use that to turn your attention away from what you want, what you believe. A direct experience of feeling the movement of your breath. Let that be your guide. This is the time-honored tradition, the old guide. It brings us into communion with the Holy Spirit. Word spirit comes from the word, it's a translation of the word pneuma, which is Greek, for the Hebrew word ruach. And all of them mean breath. That's one of the meanings of all of those words. Use your breath, this inner wind. To find that which is holy, that which is beyond what we want or believe. Prior to what we want or believe. And now allow yourself to once again become aware of what you want, what you believe, what you prefer, what you know. What you think and what you desire. No need to try to be aware of that. Again, if you're not resurrected, then that's okay. But if that comes up, let yourself be aware of it. You may find that as you come back into the human world of thoughts and desires, beliefs and preferences, that somehow you're uplifted into a heavenly world. That's fine, enjoy it. And you may find that you descend, as Jesus did, into the hells. You may find yourself participating in the harrowing of hell, as it's called. That's fine. Liberate all of those suffering people there, all of those suffering thoughts, those suffering desires. Don't abandon them. Allow yourself to descend into hell. Allow yourself to ascend into heaven, or allow yourself to settle right here in this human world. Or if you end up staying buried, allow that to happen as well. This is a time for questions or reflections, comments, discussion, whatever you'd like.
When you told us to come back and pay attention to our thoughts and what we want, it was hard to do that. I couldn't find it.
Good. You stayed buried.
Yeah, but it was more of just trying to do it intentionally.
Oh.
I forgot how to.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a great feeling.
So you were trying to do it?
Right.
Was that a kind of wanting?
Yeah, it's true.
It was a kind of wanting.
I mean, we're just listening to the assignment, so not so much. We're just following the direction.
Did I say to search for what you want and think?
You said just come back to your preferences.
Yeah. If so, sorry. I meant to say to allow yourself to do that if it comes up, but also to allow it to not come up. Allow yourself to pay attention to it, or if it doesn't come up, no need to. But it sounds like the way you heard what I said was to find what you want and believe, and then you couldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of the time, I think we don't notice it, but we create hindrances for ourselves as we do the practice. And one of the ways we create a hindrance is by trying to force ourselves to stop wanting and thinking. And you can flip that and try to want and think, and discover that then that becomes, you flipped what's hard. It suddenly becomes hard to do the thing that you're trying to force yourself to do, whatever that is. So that's a good trick in the practice. You know, if you're trying not to think and it's not working, then try to think. And sometimes it becomes difficult to think. That's a good strategy.
I actually had the same effect for me too. I when you suggested like come back, your load, however you worded it, I said I was like open to it, and it didn't happen.
Right.
And I was thinking to myself, oh, I didn't realize that it's not my belief that I'm capable of being surrendered like that.
Right.
But
then
I was
you
thinking,
were.
whoa, holy cow, maybe I am.
Right.
I don't know it.
Yeah.
But I had the same, it just like, I just was like surrendered.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah. Several minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a long time. Several seconds is actually a long time. There are a lot of different parts of this, of course. One part is that we're a habitual creature, and so if we spend a lot of time thinking and wanting, then we're just in the habit. We just have that momentum. And so if someone says, don't think or want, it's hard, not because it's inherently hard, but because we're out of practice. We've been doing something else all day long. But as you saw, after just 45 minutes, you can build a new habit. And then you have the habit of surrender. It shows how malleable we really are. We really are creatures of habit. And if we set up a certain habit, then that becomes easy. That becomes the default. So this is very, very important, and maybe the most important thing we can learn with this practice is how powerful our habits are. And we attribute reality to those habits. We identify with the habit, but actually there's nothing to identify with there. It's just a habit. You can change it, and if you can change it, then it can't be your identity. Identity at the deepest level. It can be something you identify with, but it can't be what you truly are, unchangeably, if you can change it. So that's one part of it. But another part of it is that one of the reasons that our thoughts and emotions have such power over us is that we don't surrender to them. Which might seem very counterintuitive. It might seem like if you surrender to something, it would have more power over you. But in fact, by surrendering to them, they don't accumulate. So we have a certain desire and we resist it. By resisting it, it accumulates. Because it accumulates, then a long time later, which as you saw is a few seconds or minutes, it suddenly has an enormous energy to it. Yes, it's only seconds or minutes, but it has a great deal of energy because we've been storing up all of that energy by resisting it. If you surrender to it moment by moment, then often it never gains the power it needs to impact your behavior, even in terms of what you think, even in terms of your mental behavior. It never has the momentum because it's been just seeping through the cracks and disappearing. Because you never, the bucket has some holes in it, and there's some water going in, but it just seeps out. You never have any water in the bucket. So some thoughts and desires come, but they're just gone before you even consciously experience them. They're already gone. And this is something actually that's very important. You know, you talk about in Christianity as well as in other traditions such as Buddhism. There are a lot of ascetic practices. There are a lot of practices in which you maybe don't let yourself do something that you want to do. Yes?
Lent?
Like Lent, good point, like Lent. So there's something you want to do, but you're not going to let yourself do it. And that's how we conceive of it. We say, I'm not going to let myself do it. That implies I'm going to resist doing it. So I want to do it, but I will resist doing it. Now, if we want to do it, but we resist doing it, then all of that want gets stored up. It has a great energy. What is it, Fat Tuesday?
I'm not sure. But
Is that the end of Lent?
I don't know.
What?
That's the beginning of it.
What's the end of Lent? Ash Friday, maybe?
Good Friday?
Good Friday?
Good Friday.
No, then you have all these desires that you gotta let out, as they say, and people talk about it that way. But the way that asceticism is really done by professionals, by people who can do it well, is that you don't resist at all. You let the desire come up as much as it wants to. Totally surrender to it.
Yeah.
And it's gone.
Right.
And it turns out that we don't have very many desires that are very powerful. It's very different from our modern view of things, yes, where human desire is taken to be the greatest authority in the universe. If you want it, if it's going to make you feel good, if you want to do it, and it's not going to make anyone else feel bad, then you should do it. I mean, that's how we see it. It's not hurting anyone. You hear people say all the time, why shouldn't I do it? It's not hurting anyone. That's how we see it. What people want is the supreme authority. And so that would then be catering to desire. And in terms of Buddhism, the Buddha, the first teaching he ever gave after his enlightenment, as far as most traditions are concerned, was the teaching of the middle way. And the teaching of the middle way is the teaching that to have desires and then repress them and crush them is ineffective spiritually. To have desires and do whatever they tell you to do is ineffective spiritually. And so that's the way of the modern world. In India, it was at the time of the Buddha, it was taken to be, the spiritual path was to be very ascetic, to burn yourself up, as they put it. Nowadays, we feel like, no, we do what we want. Or, customer is always right. Yes? What you want is what you should have. It's unethical to not let someone do what they want to do, unless it's hurting someone else. But then it's only unethical because it's preventing someone else from doing what they want to do. So what people want to do is the supreme authority. Both of these are taken to be a lack of spirituality. And instead of that, there's a deep equanimity, a deep surrender, which is called the middle way. So we're not actively repressing, or we're not actively indulging. We just walk between those two. And that, I think, is what you were experiencing. And when you experience that, then you discover that our human wants and beliefs are, as they say, empty. There's just nothing there. The more fully you experience them, the less of them you experience.
Yeah, it didn't come bubbling up real fast.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It's incredible. You say, okay, come on, nothing. It's only when you say, don't, that suddenly it's very excited. So you say, and there's nothing there. And it's, as I think you noticed, a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it was a good feeling, yeah. It was. I was surprised by it. I was actually quite surprised by it. It was surprising to me. Yeah. Kind of keep really wondering what was going on.
Yeah,
it was yeah.
Stay in the cave.
Yeah.
Don't move that rock. Just leave it. It's fine.
What is love?
How does it relate to what we just did? How does your question relate to the exercise we just did?
I feel like what came up for me a lot was like energy, the highest form of energy that I was feeling in my body. Felt like love, like, and everything I felt like. I was scared of, like fearful, felt like more or less like dying or dead. And so I guess I didn't want to resist the love, but I wanted to like resist
the death.
Yeah.
And they seem like two different things.
Love felt like life. And death felt like darkness. It was scary, I guess.
And what was the difference between them?
I think the feeling and the thoughts of like, I don't, like I something I wanted and something I didn't want.
And you wanted life, you didn't want death.
Right.
Good. Does that answer your question then?
Well, then if I want something, then I don't know, is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay to want things. There's a price to be paid for wanting something. And that is death. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
So you can have both or neither, but you have to pay the price somehow. You either pay the price with your life or you die. Those are your two choices.
All right.
But yeah, if you sign up for a kind of love that's different from death, different from darkness, then you have to, then you have also signed up for death and darkness. They have to come. You can't have one without the other. There's a famous story, and I think it's, I don't know, maybe it's Chinese Buddhism. Sounds Chinese to me. I'm not sure, but it's a very simple story. I don't know why it's so helpful, because it's so simple, but it's helpful to me and to a lot of other people. That there was a man, and he was working at home one day, doing some housework, or I don't know what he was doing, fixing his table, say, doing some thing that a Chinese peasant might do. And there's a knock at the door, and he went there, opened the door, and there's a very kind, happy woman at the door. He said, "Hi." He said, "Hi." He said, "I'm the goddess of good fortune." He said, "Really? Come in. Come on in, have a seat. Want some tea? I have a spare room, actually." So she came in, and she took the room. Apparently she needed a place to stay. I don't know why. She's a goddess, but for some reason she needed somewhere to stay. And so he was very happy, and suddenly everything got better in his life. Yes? Everything got better. He was fixing his table. He hit the one nail. Boom, fixed. Incredible. Couldn't believe it. He went over to, cook dinner, but he suddenly realized, oh, I already cooked dinner for today yesterday. I forgot. This is fantastic. Everything's getting better out of nowhere. And then there's a knock at the door. And so he went to the door, and a very mean, angry woman was at the door. He said, "Hi." She said, "Have you seen my sister?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, I'm the goddess of bad fortune. And I think my sister's here, and we always have to stay together. Do you have a spare room?" And he said, "I don't have another spare room. Sorry." So he went upstairs, and he told the goddess of good fortune, "You have to leave. Gotta go." It's a very simple story, but I find it helpful. It just reminds you that any kind of love that is different from any kind of love that is separate from hate is a kind of love that is accompanied by hate. Simple story. I think I'll try to make this very tangible socially in our social world. You hear nowadays a lot. People are saying it a lot that this is a golden age, and there's a lot of evidence for that. So the way it's often put is that the three primary problems. This past week I was doing a solitary retreat, and when I do that I read Buddhist scripture and sometimes other scriptures as a kind of a talk. I let the professionals give me a talk. So I saw in the text that these three problems are recorded from ancient times. The three problems are plague, sickness. People have been getting sick, very sick for a long time. Not forever, but for quite a while. Ever since agriculture, anyway. We've had plagues. And sickness has been around. We've had sickness ever since the beginning. So, sickness, or in particular plague, famine, a lack of sufficient food for everyone, starvation, and murder, in particular war, particularly in the form of war. These three problems have been very important, very significant in human history. Does that make sense? So nowadays we don't have those three problems very much. We have those problems less than ever before in recorded history anyway. Does that make sense? So nowadays, you're more likely to die of eating too much than eating too little. More people die of eating too much than eating too little nowadays. And that's incredible. That's never happened before, right? You're more likely to die. The person in the world who's most likely to kill you is you. Suicide is a greater source of, quote, murder than war, terrorism, everything put together. Crime, all of that put together. Okay? Again, that's amazing. That's never happened before in recorded history. In terms of sickness, we're doing pretty good. You know, we've overcome a lot of sicknesses, and nowadays, again, you're quite likely, you're more likely than ever before to die incapacitated and senile, alone in an old person's home than ever before. Right? It's incredible. You die of old age rather than of a childhood illness or something. That's amazing. So you say, well, good job, goddess of good fortune. Thanks a lot. Stay a while, right? Until you look at things from just a different perspective, from a non-humanist perspective. You know, you stop having human beings be at the center of the world and look at the world from a different angle. And then what do you see? If life in general is taken to be the center of the world rather than human life, what do you see? Well, you see more starvation by far due to habitat destruction than in millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, maybe more than that. We see unbelievable starvation of countless species. And not just that their numbers decline, but they go extinct, totally extinct forever. Okay? So there's more famine now than ever before, by far, because we're taking all the food and giving it to cows or chickens or human beings. Right? In terms of killing, again, human beings aren't having as many wars with each other ever since the great wars of the last century, but the war against the environment is very active. And again, there's more killing than ever before. And we also torture and kill our own domesticated animals more than ever before, cows and pigs and chickens and such. And again, we take that to the point of extinction in many, many cases. Okay, so we're not just killing individuals, we're killing entire species forever. And plague, well, the earth is sick and we're the plague. We're the most horrifying sickness, virus that's ever existed. Goddess of bad fortune showed up. And we have to look at this very closely. And so, of course, love is important. And I think the question that you ask is the most important point that's been made. You ask the question, what is love? And you discover it at deeper and deeper levels. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I wanted to go somewhere, like come back to it, like somewhere like outside of me, or like wanted to. I guess that comes with like the resurrection of like I wish there's some kind of guarantee that this love can like go into like I don't know, from like space, like or I don't know.
That the love will continue?
Yeah, forever and ever, like beyond time.
Maybe it will. You should explore. You should explore it. Discover that. I think it's worth taking a close look and find a kind of love that goes on forever. Mm-hmm. Find a kind of love that doesn't end. It's certainly worth exploring, searching for that. And what you did this evening is a part of that exploration. Mm-hmm.
My question is involving the moment when you're asked or invited to shift from not holding any attention around our beliefs, and then allowing them in. And it's actually, it seems to me actually a similar moment that the goddess of misfortune came in. It seems like the same moment. I just want to preface it with two analogies because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to express it well. As Roshi, I learned from a couple of weekends ago, was talking about the poem, I think it's T.S. Eliot, who says how cruel, April is the cruelest month. About how it's like so beautiful with all the blooming. But if you're in pain or like with the administration or things that are happening in the world at the same time, like you're so open to the beauty, but then there's also this other reality going on, and how to find the compassion and the openness that you might approach the blossoms to that reality. So my question, the other thing is it's also Passover along Easter, and in Passover we purify different parts of our soul every day between now and Shavuos. We have 49 days, and we're in the week of loving kindness right now. Different aspects of loving kindness. So there's a particular aspect that I'm working on today, and it's involving stickiness. And so my question in that moment of shifting from, letting go of all your beliefs and wants and needs, and being in that beyond self cosmic like love space, or whatever you want to call it, to then going back to, I don't know, say perform the ego or whatever you call it. But what happens when you're holding space against a oppression that an administration is like putting on the world, or a person does in a community house and then someone leaves and they felt like there's sanctuary space is violated, so then when they think of that person in the community, they have a hard time being kind because they're protecting the sanctuary. People like destroying the earth, energies that are like destroying, people trying to protect the earth and seeing energies destroying the earth. So yeah, I guess the question is in that shifting, seems to me, and I'm wondering the awareness of holding on to the place where you're protecting sanctuary or whatever it is, but then it creates a belief system that then it also seems to block compassion and openness to that other energetic, which is like the misfortune potentially with it. How do you, so that's the question. I don't think I asked it, but it's kind of like, it seems to me the idea would be able to approach that other energetic like you would have blossomed. It's much harder. I don't know if you saw the question there.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I think it's hard to talk about is that you're taking this practice immediately to a very high level. The question you're asking is a very high level question, or you could say a fundamental question, either way. It's the great question of this practice. What's the union between a practice of transcending ourselves and a practice of healing the world? How do those work together? And I think it's tricky because people like me, and I think you, so commonly talk about it in simple words, like I just did, transcend yourself, heal the world. So such a simple sentence that it's confusing because the practice of it isn't simple or easy at all. And those words can feel trite and even misleading when we're faced with the reality. How do we actually do this? How do we make sure that the peace that we experience doesn't become a complacency? How do we make sure that the compassion that we feel doesn't become a hatred or a battle, a conflict? How do we do it? And it's not easy to answer the question because you can say the answer very simply, But that's totally different than living the answer. To live the answer is something that you can't talk about at all. As they say in Zen, people say what they cannot do, and they do what they cannot say. So we can say it, but that isn't really how you do it. And when you do it, it's too subtle to ever say it. It's too subtle to ever tell anyone about it. So you're talking about something very, very powerful. And I'm going to try to answer your question. And it's such a powerful question. It's such an important question that know that this will be an inadequate answer. Okay? I can't say it.
Right, and one thing I just want to add is that I noticed there's a stickiness.
Yeah.
And it's like, it feels like a hindrance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It probably is. So the way I talk about this, what we're trying to achieve in this path is a life that unifies, that integrates wisdom, which is transcending ourselves, love, the compassion, the intent to be of benefit, and power, which is the ability to make a difference. And it's very common that those are experienced as being in conflict with each other in the way that you just described. We experience one of them, and then we let in those thoughts and desires, and there's the draw towards power, towards wanting to make a difference, to dealing with injustice and evil in the world. We want to do something about it. And when we want to do something about it, there's a stickiness, there's a resistance, which feels very different. And as you say, it doesn't feel empowering, it feels hindering, but we don't know how to be powerful without it. We don't know how to make a difference without it. Am I talking about what you're talking about? Okay, so now we have to skip over 10 years of discussion because it's already after time, and jump to the end. Okay?
Yeah.
Just jump to the very end.
Right.
And that is that power is cooperation. If you want to make a difference, then you have to cooperate. And so any resistance to something, that energy is best used in creating a way to cooperate, to work in harmony with people, rather than finding ways of working out of harmony with people. So sorry it's such a simple sentence,
Okay.
but it's not, it's then something that we can experiment with. Nice, thank you. So we can now talk about things we can do in the world, make a difference for